Chapter 15 of A Book of Discovery. A Book of Discovery by M.B. Synge. Chapter 15 Arab Wayfarers. And now we leave the fierce energy of the Norsemen westwards and turn to another energy which was leading men toward the east, to the lands beyond the Euphrates, to India, across Central Asia, even into far Cathay. These early travelers to the east were for the most part Arabs. Mohammed had bidden his followers to spread his teaching far and wide. This teaching had always appealed more to the eastern than to the western mind. So farther and farther to the east traveled the Arabs, converting the uncivilized tribes that Christianity had not reached. What a contrast are these Arabs to the explorers of the vigorous north! They always traveled by land and not by the sea, which was life to the Viking folk. To the Arabs the encircling ocean was a very "sea of darkness"; indeed, the unknown ocean beyond China was called the "sea of pitchy darkness." Their creed taught that the ocean was boundless, so that ships dared not venture out of sight of land, for there was no inhabited country beyond, and mariners would assuredly be lost in mists and fogs. So, while the Vikings tossed fearlessly about the wild northern seas, the Arab wayfarers rode eastward by well known caravan tracks, trading and teaching the ways of Mohammed. Arabic enterprise had pushed on far beyond Ptolemy's world. The Arab center lay in the city of Baghdad, the headquarters of the ruler or Caliph of the Mohammedan world. They had already opened up a considerable trade with the rapidly rising Mongol Empire, which no European had yet reached. But as this country was to play a large part in the travels of the near future, it will be interesting to hear the account given by two Mohammedan friends who journeyed thither in the year 881, just 400 years before Marco Polo's famous account. The early part of their story is missing, and we raise the curtain when they have arrived in the land of China itself, then a very small empire compared with what it is now. The Emperor of China reckons himself next after the kings of the Arabs, who they all allow to be the first and beyond all dispute the most powerful of kings, because he is the head of a great religion. In this great kingdom of China, they tell us, there are over 200 cities. Each city has 4 gates, at each of which are 5 trumpets, which the Chinese sound at certain hours of the day and of the night. There are also within each city 10 drums, which they beat at the same time, as a public token of their obedience to the emperor, as also to signify the hour of the day and of the night, to which end they also have dials and clocks with ways. China is a pleasant and fruitful country. The air is much better than the Indian provinces. Much rain falls in both these countries. In India are many desert tracts, but China is inhabited and peopled throughout its whole extent. The Chinese are handsomer than the Indians, and come nearer to the Arabs, not only in countenance but in dress, in their way of riding, in their manners, and in their ceremonies. They wear long garments and girdles in form of belts. The Chinese are dressed in silk both in winter and summer, and this kind of dress is common to the prince and the peasant. Their food is rice, which they often eat with a broth, which they pour upon the rice. They have several sorts of fruits, apples, lemons, quinces, figs, grapes, cucumbers, walnuts, almonds, plums, apricots, and coconuts. Here, too, we get the first mention of tea, which was not introduced into Europe for another 700 years, but which formed a Chinese drink in the 9th century. This Chinese drink is a herb or shrub, more bushy than the pomegranate tree, and of a more pleasant scent, but somewhat bitter to the taste. The Chinese boil water and pour it in scalding hot upon this leaf, and this infusion keeps them from all distempers. Here, too, we get the first mention of Chinaware. They have an excellent kind of earth, wherewith they make a ware of equal fineness with glass and equally transparent. There is no time here to tell of all the curious manners and customs related by these two Mohammedans. One thing struck them as indeed it must strike us today. The Chinese, poor and rich, great and small, learn to read and write. There are schools in every town for teaching the poor children, and the masters are maintained at public charge. The Chinese have a stone 10 cubits high erected in the public squares of their cities, and on this stone are engraved the names of all the medicines, with the exact price of each, and when the poor stand in need of physic, they go to the treasury, where they receive the price each medicine is rated at. It was out of such travels as these that the famous romance of Sindbad the Sailor took shape, a true story of Arab adventures of the ninth and tenth centuries in a romantic setting. As in the case of Ulysses, the adventures of many voyages are ascribed to one man, and related in a collection of tales which bears the title of the Arabian Nights. Of course, Sindbad was a native of Baghdad, the Arab center of everything at this time, and of course he journeyed eastwards as did most Mohammedans. "It occurred to my mind," says Sindbad, "to travel to the countries of other people. Then I rose and collected what I had of effects and apparel and sold them, after which I sold my buildings and all that my hand possessed, and amassed 3,000 pieces of silver. So I embarked in a ship, and with a company of merchants we traversed the sea for many days and nights. We had passed by island after island, and from sea to sea, and land to land, and in every place we sold and bought and exchanged merchandise. We continued our voyage until we arrived at an island like one of the gardens of Paradise. Here they anchored and lit fires, when suddenly the master of the ship cried aloud in great distress, 'O ye passengers, come up quickly into the ship, leave your merchandise and flee for your lives. For this apparent island upon which ye are, is not really an island, but it is a great fish that has become stationary in the midst of the sea, and the sand has accumulated upon it, and trees have grown upon it. And when ye lighted a fire it felt the heat, and now it will descend with you into the sea, and you will be all drowned.' As he spoke, the island moved, and descended to the bottom of the sea, with all that were upon it, and the roaring sea, agitated with waves, closed over it." Let Sindbad continue his own story. "I sank in the sea with the rest, but God delivered me and saved me from drowning, and supplied me with a great wooden bowl, and I laid hold upon it and got into it and beat the water with my feet as with oars, while the waves sported with me. I remained so a day and a night, until the bowl came to a stoppage under a high island, whereupon were trees overhanging the sea. So I laid hold upon the branch of a lofty tree and clung to it until I landed on the island. Then I threw myself upon the island like one dead. After wandering about he found servants of the king of Borneo, and all sailed together to an island beyond the Malay Peninsula. And the king of Borneo sent for Sindbad and heaped him with honors. He gave him costly dress, and made him superintendent of the seaport and adviser of affairs of state. And Sindbad saw many wonders in this far distant sea. At last, one day I stood upon the shore of the sea, with a staff in my hand, as was my custom, and lo! a great vessel approached, wherein were many merchants. They unloaded their wares, telling Sindbad that the owner of their goods, a man from Baghdad, had been drowned, and they were selling his things. "What was the name of the owner of the goods?" asked Sindbad. "His name was Sindbad of the Sea." Then Sindbad cried, "Oh, master, know that I am the owner of the goods and I am Sinbad of the Sea." Then there was great rejoicing and Sinbad took leave of the King of Borneo and set sail for Baghdad, the abode of peace. But the spirit of unrest was upon him and soon he was off again. Indeed, he made 7 voyages in all, but there is only room here to note a few of the most important points in each. This time he sailed to the coast of Zanzibar, East Africa, and, anchoring on the beautiful island of Madagascar, amid sweet smelling flowers, pure rivers, and warbling birds, Sinbad fell asleep. He awoke to find the ship had sailed away, leaving him without food or drink, and not a human being was to be seen on the island. Then I climbed up into a lofty tree and began to look from it to the right and left, but saw nothing save sky and water and trees and birds and islands and sands. At last he found an enormous bird. Unwinding his turban, he twisted it into a rope, and tying one end round his wrist, tied the other to one of the bird's great feet. Up flew the giant bird high into the sky, and Sinbad with it, descending somewhere in India in the Valley of Diamonds. The bird was afterwards identified as an enormous eagle. "And I arose and walked in that valley," says Sinbad, "and I beheld its ground to be composed of diamonds, with which they perforate minerals and jewels, porcelain, and the onyx, and it is a stone so hard that neither iron nor rock have any effect upon it. All that valley was likewise occupied by serpents and venomous snakes." Here Sinbad found the camphor trees. Under each of these trees 100 men might shade themselves. From these trees flowed liquid camphor. In this island, too, is a kind of wild beast called rhinoceros. It's a huge beast with a single horn, thick, in the middle of its head, and it lifteth the great elephant upon its horn. Thus, after collecting heaps of diamonds, Sinbad returned to Baghdad, a rich man. Again his soul yearns for travel. This time he starts for China, but his ship is driven out of its course and cast on the island of apes, probably Sumatra. These apes, the most hideous of beasts, covered with hair like black felt, surrounded the ship. They climbed up the cables and severed them with their teeth, to Sindbad's great alarm. He escaped to the neighboring islands known as the Clow Islands, and again reached Baghdad safely. Again and yet again he starts forth on fresh adventures. Now he is sailing on the seas beyond Ceylon. Now his ship is being pursued by a giant roe, whose young have been killed and eaten by Sindbad. Sindbad as usually escapes upon a plank, and sails to an island, where he meets the Old Man of the Sea, probably a huge ape from Borneo. On he passed to the Island of Apes, where every night the people who reside in it go forth from the doors of the city that open upon the sea in their fear of the apes, lest they should come down upon them in the night from the mountains. After this we find Sindbad trading in pepper on the Coromandel coast of modern India, and discovering a wealth of pearls by the seashore of Ceylon. But at last he grew tired of seafaring, which was never congenial to Arabs. Hateful was the dark blue sky, vaulted over the dark blue sea, sore task to heart worn out by many wars, and eyes grown dim with gazing on the pilot stars. So he leaves private adventuring alone, and is appointed by the Caliph of Baghdad to convey a letter and present to the Indian Prince of Ceylon, an expedition that lasts him 27 years. The presents were magnificent. They included a horse worth 10,000 pieces of gold, with its saddle adorned with gold set with jewels, a book, a splendid dress, and some beautiful white Egyptian cloth, Greek carpets, and a crystal cup. Having duly delivered these gifts, he took his leave, meaning to return to his own country. But the usual adventures befell him. This time his ship was surrounded by a number of boats on board of which were men, like little devils with swords and daggers. These attacked the ship, captured Sindbad, and sold him to a rich man as a slave. He set him to shoot elephants from a tree with bows and arrows. At last, after many other adventures, and having made 7 long voyages, poor Sindbad reached his home. The romance of Sindbad the Sailor is really a true story of Arab adventures at sea during the ninth and tenth centuries, put into a romantic setting and ascribed to one man. In the above map, which is a portion of the map of the world made by the famous Arab geographer Edrisi in 1154 A.D., many of the places to which Sindbad's story relates have been identified. Their modern names are as follows: Kotroba is probably Sokotra. Kolam is Kolan near Cape Comorin. Hind is India. Serendib is Ceylon. Mufili or Monsul, the Valley of Diamonds, is Masulipatam. Roibahat, the Claw Islands, are the Maldive Islands. Rami, the Island of Apes, is Sumatra. Maidzaba, the island with the volcano, is Banka. Senf is Tsiampa, South Cochinchina. Mudza or Meroji is Borneo. Cameroon is Java. Maid, the Camphor Island, is Formosa. Edrisi's names are as those which are used in the Arabian Nights. End of chapter 15.